bringing you the stories behind the standards. This is the BSI Education Podcast with Matthew Charles, Alan Sellers, and Cindy Parakill. Today's episode is with the BSI Group Chief Executive, Susan Taylor-Martin.
It's a really interesting and very global perspective, but all of it kind of founded on trying to help organisations be better. It really is about sharing knowledge, sharing innovation, and really raising the bar in terms of performance for, the organisations that we work with, and that's really motivating to me.
Hello, my name is Matthew Charles, and I'm with Alan Sellers.
Hello, Matthew.
And I'm also with Cindy Parakill.
Hi, Matthew.
Now, at the top of the episode, we were played in there with an excerpt from my conversation with our special guest, Susan Taylor-Martin, the new BSI Group Chief Executive. Now, Susan is only 5 weeks into her new job, so I think we can call that a bit of an exclusive for the podcast, and we're very grateful that she was able to speak to us. As you'll hear later, my conversation with Susan was about the professional. We spoke about the BSI Group and how BSI and the standards community are responding to the big global challenges we're facing right now, such as COVID-19, but we also spoke about the personal too, including about her own standards journey, which as regular listeners will know is something that we ask of all of our guests, and also about that working at home for much of the past year means there has been some improvement in her culinary skills, though as she's happy to admit, this was from a relatively low base. Now, I thought it was a really open and fascinating conversation, and I really enjoyed it. What did you both think?
Yeah, I loved it too. What she said about starting a job during a pandemic really resonated with me because I also started my job with BSI in March 2020, and I haven't met you or Alan in person. And at this rate, who knows if we'll ever get to meet face to face. And it was also great to hear about her global perspective for BSI, and it was fantastic to see what her take is on digital transformation because we're going to cover it in a future episode.
I was really interested in her thoughts around diversity and inclusion and about BSI as an organisation, but also how diversity and inclusion affects the standards making process. Because without the most diverse range of perspectives around the table, we can't make the best standards. That really came through for me.
Now, before we hear from Susan, we need your standards desk of news, Alan. But before we get to that, now in the last episode in your standards desk of news, you spoke about ISO 7010 and the new active volcano zone symbol. And I said, active volcano news sound like a good idea. And we were speculating about how many active volcanoes there are actually out there. Well, I did some digging, and just so happened that part of Child B's homeschooling this week has been on volcanoes, and I mean homeschooling in the loosest possible sense. So this is taken from the Smithsonian Institution Global Volcanology Programme, and this is data as of December 2020. Volcanoes erupting now, 46. Volcanoes that erupted during 2020, 63. Volcanoes with confirmed historical eruptions, 562. Volcanoes with confirmed Holocene, which is in the last 10,000 years, eruptions, 869. And volcanoes thought to have erupted in the last 10,000 years, 1,420.
Matthew, I think you can add Mount Etna to that list. I think that erupted a few days ago now.
Active volcano news. They continue. The definition of volcano is as important in answering the number question as the definition of active. Usage has varied widely, with volcano applied to individual vents, volcanic edifices, or volcanic fields. But perhaps the most honest answer to the number question is that we do not really have an accurate count of the world's volcanoes. Now, you said, Alan, about maybe you've got one in your back garden, so it could still be true. But there are at least 1,000 identified magma systems on land alone likely to erupt in the near future. So rather than sort this out, I just seem to have opened a can of worms, or a can of magma in this case. So, Alan, can we have your standards desk of news, please? And Cindy and I will be careful with our interruptions.
The headlines this week: draft standard for the assessment of reused components, and recommendations for interpreting services. The draft standard IEC 63333, General Methods for Assessing the Proportion of Reused Components in Products, builds on the drive to make better reuse of components in products so that less energy is spent making new ones. As products start to set themselves apart with environmental credentials, this standard will provide a way to compare the proportion of reused components between products.
അടുത്ത വാർത്ത എന്താ Alan?
Pardon? What did you say? Perhaps I'm in need of draft standard ISO 23155 interpreting services. The standard provides recommendations about the competency of translators and their requirements to enable effective translations during conferences. Now, I've heard it said that if you're trilingual, you speak 3 languages, if you're bilingual, you speak 2, and if you speak 1 language, you're English.
Now, I think there's only one person on this podcast who's trilingual, Alan, and it's certainly not you or I.
I think you're right there, Matthew. I wonder how many translators have moved into the online world of meetings.
Yeah, it really looks like this sector is really going to boom in the next decade. Is it time to consider a career switch?
Not for me.
No, I don't think so. I'm certainly an Englishman when it comes to languages. Now, both standards are now available for public comment via BSI Standards Development Portal. Get commenting now and shape the way these standards develop. And that's the Standards Desk of News for this week. Back to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Alan. And as always, you can find the links there to those news stories in the episode notes. And for a prize, you want to email into education@bsigroup.com with what language Cindy was speaking there. Here's me with a quick reminder that for more information on BSI Education, go to bsigroup.com/education. This link and others on the themes raised in this episode can be found in the episode notes. Do please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts, and share us on social media using the hashtag BSIEdPod. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode or ideas for future episodes, then do please get in touch at education@bsigroup.com. We really welcome your feedback. Now, the aim of this podcast is to bring you the stories behind the standards. Our story for this episode comes courtesy of our very special guest, Susan Taylor-Martin, the new BSI Group Chief Executive. Before joining BSI, Susan had led a range of information, publishing and software businesses, first at Reuters and then at Thomson Reuters. Most recently, she served as president of its global legal business based in New York. She also has experience of the leisure and hospitality sector through being an independent, non-executive director of Whitbread plc since 2012. And she's a former chair of the London Council of the Confederation of British Industry. I discussed with Susan about the professional side of things, and in particular the role BSI and the standards community is playing to help meet some of the big global challenges we're facing, such as climate change and sustainable development. But I kicked off our conversation by asking her about the personal. So, like many people across the world, you've started a new job during a global pandemic and had to meet your colleagues remotely. Now, I know you're only in week 5 of your new role, Susan, but how's that been for you?
It has been challenging. I'll be honest, and challenging because I didn't think we'd be back in lockdown in the UK. And so it took some time just to kind of get my head around the fact, no, it's just going to be pretty virtual for quite a while. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Once you mindset's so powerful, once you shift gears, it's all right. You're not trying to struggle against something that you can't change. So, but it has been challenging. But the fantastic upside has been that through technology, I've actually been able to meet many more people in BSI through kind of video screen than I possibly would have met, face to face over the first 5 weeks. So in fact, it's allowed me to kind of reach all sorts of parts of BSI that would have, that would have languished until I could have got on a plane, and that hasn't been the case. So every cloud, as they say, has something of a silver lining.
I think you're right. I mean, I've certainly spoken to people across the whole BSI group that I probably would never have spoken to.
Yes.
Doing these podcasts, but also just generally because we've been able to do it. So I think that is fantastic. Now, also during the past year, many people have taken advantage of the new sort of working and living conditions to do something new. So take up art or even learn an instrument or cooking. And you remember back in the UK in March
I'm impressed
last year,
with
the sort of banana bread craze, and everyone was perfecting their sourdough.
Exactly.
I just wonder have you developed any new skills or interests during that time?
None of those. I feel really, it's really a poor show, isn't it? Because I feel like I'm very impressed with people that have kind of learnt new languages or, learnt an instrument or goodness only knows what. There are people doing fantastic things out there. I've managed to stay sane, which I think is important, because actually I think it's been pretty hard, I think, on all of us in some shape or form, dealing with that kind of low-level depression of being restricted. My greatest joy actually has been my eldest child and his girlfriend have been living with us for most of lockdown. And, he's of an age, he's 25, he's of an age where you wouldn't expect him to be home again. And so it's been a real pleasure spending kind of serious time with him. He would probably say too much time, clearly, but that's been a real joy. And I certainly have been cooking more. I'm a terrible cook, but I have had much more opportunity to practice over this last year than before. So that's also been kind of been good. So there are definitely been a few kind of upsides to the restrictions, and I'm just very grateful that we've got so many people around the world that have been in absolute dire straits, whether from a health perspective, from a financial perspective. I think it's been a really, really tough 12 months, and I'm grateful that, sad about the restrictions, but I'm grateful for so many other things.
I think you're right. I mean, certainly having a member of the family in there, it could have gone one or two ways, couldn't it? But it went a very positive way, which is great. I've certainly improved my pizza dough making skills, partly because you actually have got the time, and you think, well, normally sort of fitting things in, and you think, well, actually, I have got a bit more time to do that. So that has been good. I also managed to get around and watch Breaking Bad, which I'd never got around to watching. So
exactly.
To binge on that.
No, that's a good, those kind of series. I feel I did have a point where I thought, I might watch The West Wing start to finish, and then actually when I added it up, there was just absolutely no way I was ever going to make it through. So I decided against that. But you're right, all fun things. But you're also homeschooling, aren't you?
Homeschooling, yes, the joys of that, and
that is tough.
Trying to just fit things in, but I think we've learned, obviously, in lockdown 3.0 now, so we've learned from lockdown 1 and 2 about the battles that you'll take on. So yes, exactly. It's been an interesting journey, that one.
Yes, and it's one of those times when you've got to cut yourself a little bit of slack, I think, just in terms of it's all having, don't set your sights too high.
Exactly.
Getting through the day is kind of good enough at some level.
Lower those expectations. Exactly. Yes, you start off thinking we'll do maths and English, and then we'll do maths, and then we'll just do a few sums. Let's just get those done.
That's right.
Now, talking of journeys, we ask this of all of our guests about their particular standards journey, and we're finding they sort of broadly go into two camps. You've either got guests that have been steeped in standards and had a sort of long professional background in them, and then there are those that are sort of relatively new to the standards world, and we're calling them, asking them if they've been seduced by standards. So I'll ask you, like many of our guests, have you also been seduced by standards?
I have. I'm not an engineer by background, as you know, and I didn't know much about the standards world. I did know about BSI in terms of the kite mark. And I'd heard about the organisation, but actually as I kind of dug into it, just this wealth of kind of knowledge and know-how that just courses through the company's veins is really, really fascinating. And understanding and learning about kind of the world of standards, the way in which they're set, the sort of the voluntary way that people come together to talk about best practice, such a powerful thing. And the thing that I really, really kind of resonated with me is, BSI is an organization that can have a massive impact. I think of it as a little bit like a pebble that you throw into the pond. And it's just, there are so many kind of, it can really amplify and speed change in so many different ways through the adoption of standards. So they're kind of I've absolutely been seduced. And I think there's something of a secret. I don't know. I think there are pockets of our economy that really make fantastic use of standards, and particular industries absolutely kind of fundamentally require standards, sometimes from a regulatory perspective. But it really does make you realize the power of standards to deliver change, because they are such practical things. I think about that particularly in the light of kind of thinking about sustainability in particular. So many companies struggling, I think, with what to do. The standards can be a very, very powerful tool, I think, for doing things differently, and that's how we change. We change by doing things differently. So I'm a newbie when it comes to standards, but I've certainly been seduced by them and their power.
Now you talked about change there, and obviously you were a new chief executive for the BSI Group. Now you're the first female chief executive for BSI. It's a 120-year history. Now, I just wonder if that's something that you've thought about, and how important that is to you, but also how important is diversity and inclusion, you think, to BSI?
The diversity and inclusion agenda is incredibly important to every business, to every institution. It really applies to BSI, because this business, almost more than any other that I've worked in, is all about the people. It's all about talent. It's all about attracting and retaining really talented, expert people. And we need to make sure that we get the best people, and they will naturally, come from a very diverse set of backgrounds. And when I talk about diversity, for me, it's diversity in absolutely everything, not just gender and ethnicity, sexual orientation, absolutely everything, life experience, everything. It's really, really important. Every bit of research that I've ever read on this topic has always talked about the quality of the decision making is just so much better. The actions that we take are so much better if we involve a diverse group of people. So for me, it's important that BSI is a really inclusive environment where everyone feels that they can bring their whole selves to work and be themselves fully. That's important, because we will deliver better for our clients the more inclusive we are. I think that's absolutely vital. And it's one of the areas actually that I'm very interested in, particularly from a standard setting perspective, because I think historically kind of the world of standards has been the preserve of a relatively kind of a group of people perhaps lacking in diversity. And we've got a fantastic opportunity, I think, to really start to kind of engage a much bigger group, broader, more inclusive group in terms of coming up with standards. So I think it's very interesting from a standard setting perspective, very interesting to BSI. And actually, I shouldn't use the word interesting. It's vital. It's crucial. If we don't ensure that we have a really inclusive, diverse team, then we will not deliver, I think, on the promise that BSI has.
Now, BSI holds a unique position in the standards world. Obviously, we are the national standards body here in the UK, but we also provide standards products and services all over the world. So I suppose, can you describe the BSI group for us in sort of simple terms?
Yes, it's interesting, actually, you kind of say that, because you're right, we've got a sort of split personality a little bit in terms of, the national standards body piece covered by the kind of Royal Charter is, we work for the UK government, ensuring that, we've got great UK standards, and that UK industry, business, corporations are well represented as part of the kind of international standard setting agenda. And actually, the UK is, we are one of the biggest contributors to the international standards agenda, which is fantastic through BSI. So even in our kind of UK world, as it were, actually it's a very international outlook, because business is totally global, and therefore that global perspective is essential. When I think about BSI, I do think that, if I think about it almost kind of as a pyramid, as it were, and I think the standards setting that we do through the national standards body, the distribution of standards through our knowledge solutions part of our business, kind of at the bottom of that pyramid, if you imagine. And then if we kind of move up the pyramid, we've then got our business is focused on making sure that we deliver against those standards. So that's our sort of assurance business, and we've got a sort of a general assurance business that covers many, many industries and sectors, and also an assurance business that's very focused on medical devices. And then right at the kind of the top of the pyramid is the world of consulting, which is a relatively newer activity for us as BSI. And I think of that as kind of the top of the pyramid because often those consultants are working in areas such as cybersecurity or environmental health and safety, and they're working absolutely at the cutting edge. So they're not working to standards that already exist in the market. They're often working with corporations that end up setting standards for the future. So it's where we, there's kind of a virtuous circle, if you imagine, from our consulting world back into the world of kind of standard setting, as we realize that kind of cutting edge work needs to become the basis of a best practice standard. So it's a really interesting and very global perspective, but all of it kind of founded on trying to help organizations be better. It really is about sharing knowledge, sharing innovation, and really raising the bar in terms of performance for, the organizations that we work with. And that's really motivating to me.
You mentioned, Susan, there, that crucial sort of international perspective, and certainly some of the education work that I do, talking to students around the UK, I talk about standards being an international game. And in September, the UK and BSI will host ISO Week here in London. Now, BSI was instrumental in creating ISO, the International Standards Organisation, 75 years ago, and many leading international management standards started as British standards. So I suppose, do you see BSI continuing to play such a leading role in standards development in that way?
Absolutely. And it goes back to the fact, as I sort of mentioned before, we're operating in a very global economy, and so that global perspective is vital. And the fact that, BSI and therefore the UK through BSI is so active on that international standards agenda is fantastic. It's exactly the way that it should be. We're very excited. And obviously Scott Steedman, kind of my colleague on the BSI board and who heads up our standards world, is very active in ISO and will be very active as part of this of ISO Week in London. We're really looking forward to taking part in that and continuing the kind of the leading role that we have in that ISO world.
Ever wondered how standards are made? Or who gets to make them? Why standards are numbered the way they are? And who gets to choose these numbers? Or maybe you have a burning question about standards related to your job or the sector in which you work? Well, this is your chance to ask the BSI Education Podcast, and we will get your questions answered. All you need to do is record your question via audio message and send it to education@bsigroup.com. We'll put the best ones to a panel of experts in a future episode, so stay tuned.
Now, there's another huge event taking place in the UK this year. So the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP, and it'll be COP26 in Glasgow in November. You mentioned earlier on when we started kind of conversation about sustainable development. So I suppose to get to expand on that a little bit, what role do standards play in protecting the planet?
We have a lot of kind of technical standards today around sustainability in its broadest definition and from a kind of climate perspective too. But I feel like there is absolutely more that we can do from a BSI perspective, and there's more that we can do. More that we can do. When I talk about that, I mean from a kind of a BSI's own internal sustainability agenda, as it were. That's something that we're very focused on. But we're as focused on thinking about how we can leverage the standards world to really help organizations grapple with what, their role and the part that they can play in such a kind of key topic. And it's a world where there's a lot of complexity out there. There's an enormous amount of information. I think many organizations really struggle with so what I know that there's an issue. I've seen the data. I understand the science, but I'm really unsure what I need to do and how I can, how can I move the needle? What can I do differently? And I think standards can be a very practical way of taking steps to really improve, an organization's sustainability. So I think we've absolutely kind of already, there are standards out there today, both at a BSI and an ISO level, obviously, that we use and that we certify against, we assure against today. I feel like this is an area that we could make an absolute step change. So what would we do to make sure that, those standards are really accepted and kind of accelerate the usage of those standards across our client base and to new clients? I think that's something that we should absolutely focus on. I think COP26 is going to be, we hope to kind of be playing an important role in that conference. Just as we kind of look back on Paris and see how important that was, I think this is going to be an absolutely vital conversation. The thing I'm most excited about, though, is how can we help deliver concrete action, out at the end of that conference. So what can we do that can turn the important statements and agreements and commitments that we make around the world into something that an organization, a business, an SME could then really do something differently and contribute. So that's the piece that I think we're really, really focused on, is how can we help ensure that we've got some real action-oriented deliverables that come out of that conference.
Now, picking up on you said there about help and support on behalf of BSI. Now, back to COVID again. COVID has been had a huge, dramatic impact on people's lives and livelihoods across the world. What practical support has BSI been providing to support people and organisations during these really difficult times?
I have to kind of call out my new colleagues who've done just heroic work over the last year, and both in terms of kind of supporting our 5,000 colleagues around the world, making sure that people kind of have stayed safe through the period. I think the organization pivoted very quickly to kind of moving to kind of a remote way of working and continuing to support our clients remotely. So both the team and our business have been remarkably resilient during that period of time. And, as I said, just a real call out to my predecessor, Howard Kerr, and the leadership team and every single individual across the organization who I think, it's their commitment and their resilience that have kind of seen us through this period. So there's a lot of work that we did for kind of clients within our own organization. But you're right, BSI was also very engaged supporting the UK and the world's response to kind of COVID in a whole range of ways. We had over 100 relevant standards were made freely available. So those covered kind of vital response areas like ventilators, personal protective equipment, PPE, hygiene products, risk management, business continuity. And we know that over 124,000, of those documents were downloaded by people on that basis and used. So that's excellent. We held a whole range of webinars, particularly around business continuity, with thousands of participants across the world. The group that I mentioned earlier are our medical devices notified body. Those technical experts undertook technical file reviews on behalf of the UK's Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MRHA. And they were looking, for example, at the new ventilator systems. We were looking at quality management audits of manufacturers on behalf of MHRA to make sure that they met the required standard for various products. Our product certification team supported the rapid deployment of PPE by developing testing procedures that provided these kind of fast-track routes for establishing performance of products. And we have a kite mark, for example, that we launched last year for face coverings. So there was a lot of work that was happening across the group, including people, again, particularly within our medical devices group, where we've got a number of kind of clinicians working there who went back to the front line to support their medical colleagues and healthcare provision. So a fantastic response, I would say, from across the organisation. And interestingly, one of the things that we worked on was guidance to help managers manage a safe return to the workplace. which include kind of health and safety, IT security, procurement, hygiene, those sorts of things. Some of that guidance has subsequently been taken up by ISO, we were talking about just earlier, with a view to forming the basis of a standard for dealing with future pandemics. So what I think is impressive, it's not just dealing with the kind of the crisis in the here and now, but the idea that we can kind of encapsulate those learnings into a standard that we can use for the future is really powerful.
And when you say it's, as you say, you're only week 5 for the job, but given what you just said, those sort of lessons for the COVID experience, the big changes and the big challenges that are surrounding us in terms of climate change, are you beginning to think, where does BSI go next?
I'm in a very fortunate position that we've got something of a unique organisation. With a really interesting model in terms of kind of the reinvestment of our profits and the ability to really provide, and help deliver a kind of positive impact for kind of the myriad of stakeholders that we have. The fact that we've had a really kind of robust financial performance, not just in 2020 in very difficult times, but over the last kind of decade, the business has gone from strength to strength, all of which kind of allows us to have an even greater impact. And I think that is what's very motivating and really interesting. So I think, for me, it's kind of strategically, I'm thinking about, well, how do we sharpen our focus? And where are the areas where we think we can deliver, the greatest benefit? So continuing the kind of the really great work that I think that's happened to date. That said, you can never sit back on your laurels, and I think we absolutely have to to think through how the world is changing and and always have in our minds, and I'm obsessed with kind of the client and adding, value for our clients, and we should always be striving to kind of add greater value. So, there are a couple of areas that I'm super interested in. One, we've talked about, I think sustainability is an agenda where we can really bring, standards in particular can really deliver impact. I think the other area that I'm very interested in is around all things digital, to be frank, sort of digital transformation. And I think as an organisation, BSI is, we need to be thinking about greater use of technology internally across our business to raise the bar in terms of our own performance. We need to be thinking digitally in terms of how we deliver our services and solutions. And I think we will be developing new digital products for the future. So I think our world is changing. I think what clients value is changing, and I think we really need to be kind of ahead of that. And I think technology is a very important piece of that. And that's definitely kind of obviously from my background at Thomson Reuters, it's a very digital organization. So that whole world of kind of data and workflow is something that I'm super interested from this perspective. And it's an area where I do think there have been a few sort of silver linings from the world of COVID, notwithstanding the horrible sort of personal human toll and, the incredibly difficult kind of economic sort of situation that I think the world will find itself coming out of COVID. What has been interesting is, and BSI is a fantastic example of this, we have used digital in a completely different way. It was something that was already kind of bubbling along, certainly from a kind of a standards and an assurance perspective. But I think the pandemic has absolutely kind of forced us to kind of accelerate our use of digital in ways that I think, that genie is never going back in the bottle. I think we'll be really thinking about some of the lessons that we've learned in terms of delivering greater value, in terms of being more agile, in terms of, working much faster, really speeding up innovation. I think there are some things that we've learned through the pandemic that we don't want to lose.
We love it, Susan, when our guests mention upcoming episodes or subjects of upcoming episodes. Yeah. So we are going to be doing one around digital transformation. So that will be coming up soon. And something you've also mentioned there about sort of using technology and sort of the future of standards, how standards are developed. So that will also be the subject of another episode. So stay tuned for that.
Yes.
As a final thought, then, I just wonder what your personal hopes and sort of dreams are for 2021.
I've got a very basic one. I'm really looking forward to meeting my team face to face. I haven't even met my kind of leadership team sort of in the flesh, as it were. So I'm really, really looking forward to that and having a team discussion. And Teams, Zoom, all of our kind of video conferencing. I mean, again, organizations kind of leapt on that, and there have been benefits, as I said right at the beginning. Fantastic that I can meet with colleagues from all around the world much more easily, and without the climate impact of getting on a plane, which is good. But I am really looking forward to some kind of human contact again, and I really look forward to meeting people across the world. The other thing I'm really keen, excited to do is meet clients. I think that's one of the things that's more difficult to kind of organise as you kind of come new into a role, and kind of meeting people virtually is not ideal. But I really look forward to kind of getting out and going out with our team, for example, as they are kind of going about their work, assuring clients around the world, really understanding and seeing the kind of the delivery of our services kind of in the flesh, as it were, is going to be really important. So I really look forward to that. And I also look forward to, on a personal note, going out for dinner because my cooking, as I mentioned earlier, leaves something to be desired. And so just the idea of a non-home cooked meal is really quite exciting.
It's amazing. You always crave those
pleasures.
Simple things.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's quite exciting. I do think coming out of this period, we will be grateful for the small things in a way that I'm sure we'll probably lose that incredibly quickly, but we'll be grateful for the small things. But the trick is, as I said, I think there have been some real lessons, both in terms of dealing with a pandemic that we can't lose, but also, things that have really changed the way that we operate as a business, the way that, the things that are important to our colleagues, the focus on kind of well-being that I think we've had through the pandemic. Those things can't stop. We've got to absolutely continue with that. I do think it's interesting because one of the things that's really kind of struck me is just how bizarrely, because it's been technically sort of intermediated, but I think, businesses have become much more human. And we realise that our real strategic advantage for every business, particularly for BSI, I would say, is all about our people. And so really focusing on our colleagues and team and supporting them is incredibly important.
Susan Taylor-Martin, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to your upcoming podcasts. They sound fantastic, particularly there. So I'm glad that there are some topics there that really kind of sort of resonate with me. So I really look forward to those, and hopefully, once I'm kind of more than 5 weeks in, have me back. I'd love to come back and talk a little bit more.
Oh, we'll definitely have you back. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matthew.
You have been listening to an episode of the BSI Education Podcast. To find out more, visit bsigroup.com/education.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.